man that you see before you is Alfonso Capone. He was an Italian gangster who was born in New York City and later moved to Chicago. By the time that Capone was 26, he took place in extortion rackets, liquor dealing, prostitution, gambling, and much more. He had the city under his control and therefore was only charged with tax evasion. And with all of the crimes that Capone committed, he managed to keep his family out of all of it. Even though Capone scammed the government, he made a lot of money. He was smart, sly, and extremely loyal. But if you cross Capone, now that's a different story. Capone was known by many as the leader and ganger of Chicago. He was often called Scarface by his friends, people walking down the street, and rival gang members. Capone hated his famous nickname, and who could really blame him? The name Scarface was given to Capone when he got into a bar fight while working under Frankie Yale. Yale was a violent man. While under his power, Capone was working as a bartender and he saw a pretty girl. This girl was with a man, but Capone decided to hit on her anyways. This man that she was with happened to be her brother, and the man punched Capone in his sister's honor. Capone fought back, but the man had a knife and slashed him 3 times across the face, leaving scars that led him to be called Scarface. Capone was a straight B student, which was good at the time, but then he had to drop out of school in the 6th grade to help support his family. He picked up some odd jobs, then joined Frankie Yale's gang in New York. Yale was a violent man, and this is where Capone's life of crime began. Capone left Yale's gang and joined Torrio's. Torrio ran things very differently than Yale. He was an honest man and shaped Capone to be just like him. Capone became the apprentice of Torrio. Eventually, after working with Capone for a long time and building his trust, Torrio invited Capone to Chicago to join the Colossal Mob as a lieutenant. Capone took the offer and went with him to Chicago. In Chicago, Capone started to brew alcohol, which was against the law since the Prohibition Act was recently passed throughout all of the states. Little did Capone know that he would soon rule Chicago with Torrio. The woman in the picture is May Coughlin. May and Capone got married in 1918. Before they were married, Capone had a son named Sonny Capone. May and Sonny were the 2 most important people in Capone's life. One thing that people forget about Capone is that even though he was a gangster, he still provided for his family, and he loved them very much. He made sure to never put his family in the middle of one of his crimes, and always made sure that they were kept safe. When Dion Obayan, a man who worked with Torrio and Capone, was killed on their behalf of November in 1924 for betraying them, one of Obayan's friends wanted revenge. Capone was worried, so he hired bodyguards. However, Torrio was not scared, so he took no precautions. This backfired on Torrio, and he was brutally attacked and shot, leading him to have to retire from crime life and had to leave his gang in the hands of Al Capone.
About excitement at the county jail. It's finally come to pass, and here's the proof. Mr. Alphonse Capone, alias Mr. Al Brown, alias the Big Shot, has met the enemy, and he is there, on his way to the Dearborn Street station with an escort that'll do credit to a sultan.
According to History.com, it was hard not to notice Al Capone. This couldn't be truer. Capone and his family lived a life of luxury. From selling alcohol during Prohibition, it is predicted that Capone made more than $100 million every year. Capone would often be seen wearing suits, diamond rings, and hats that would make it almost impossible to walk past him without recognizing who it was.
Street station with an escort that'll do credit to a sultan. It won't be long now before the world's most notorious gangster will be only an offensive memory. And if he behaves himself while he's the guest of Uncle Sam in Atlanta, he'll be out again in only 7.5 years. And so,
in 1929, on 21st 22nd North Clark Street, the same street that the Chicago's famous Wrigley Field is on, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre took place. There are many misconceptions about this killing. Many people think that Capone was the one doing the actual murder, but he was in fact at Florida at the time. Capone ordered 2 of his men to dress as police officers and take the guns from rival gang members, which were about to get slaughtered. Then more of the men faced the wall, and more of Capone's men shot them 90 times, leaving them there to die. The real reason that Capone hired these killers was to kill their leader, George Bugs Morin, but he showed up 7 minutes late and was never killed by Capone. One of the many things that Capone was careful with was how he handled money. Capone only had bank accounts in other people's names and only ever wrote 1 check. There are letters between the people working on a case against Capone. A special intelligence unit writes in a letter, "The Capone investigation is going steadily ahead. Not as fast as I would like it to have, but the evidence in the case against Al has already been strengthened since my last letter to you." Capone's case was worked on for many years before he was finally arrested. Capone only started to get followed by the borough after he refused to go to court. On one court date, he was sick and he was excused for not going. However, after that court date, he did not show up for another 2 courts. He even went on a cruise for one of them. When they finally caught Capone, him and his bodyguard were sentenced to 1 year in prison. Capone ended up getting released after 9 months due to his good behavior. On November 16, 1939, Capone was released after having served 7 years in prison. This is only the end of his life in prison, though. It was a long road to get out. On February 28, 1931, Capone was sentenced to go to Cook County Jail, which is on the south side of Chicago, for 6 months. Then on June 16, 1931, he pled guilty to charges on probation and tax evasion. However, Capone ended up not pleading guilty after the judge told him that he was not forced to keep the deal with Capone after Capone bribed the judge. Once again, Capone was sentenced to time in prison due to a trial that took place on November 24th. He was convicted on October 18, 1931, along with 11 years in federal prison. He was charged $272,692 in total between taxes that Capone owed the federal government, fines, and the money that he had to pay to go to court. Contrary to popular belief, Ness did not have nearly as much to do with catching Capone as his biography might have led the general public into thinking. Ness did play a part in putting Capone behind bars, but not nearly as much as his memoir makes you think. Later on in his life, Ness ended up losing an election for mayor in Cleveland and became an alcoholic. The document in the image is the United States vs. Alphonse Capone case. It is a court order stating that Capone was guilty of accounts 1, 5, 9, 13, and 18. However, he was found innocent of 17 other accounts. Even though Capone was in Alcatraz, which was the tightest security prison at the time, he did not look at it as a challenge to escape. In fact, he wrote a letter to his son stating that he was playing instruments and being rewarded with good behavior. After he got out of prison, he was never recorded going back to Chicago. Capone was very generous. He paid for 1 kid to go to college, he would tip large amounts, and he would even give people clothes during the harsh winters in Chicago. He took people in power and gave it to people in need. Whether or not ethical, this was how Capone did business. One quote that really makes you think was written in an article by the New York Times' Peter Moss. Moss writes, "Modern America has always carried on a love-hate relationship with organized crime. Honestly, I think that very few quotes can come close to proving what Capone did. In just one simple sentence, we see how Chicago, while good at hiding it, is still like Capone's time. Chicago and America as a whole tend to still have a lot to do with organizations that find loopholes and ways around laws and policies. Even though Capone did some good things in his life, it is important not to forget about all of the bad things that he's done as well. For example, he led the Chicago gang era, which is practically the reason why Chicago has had so much organized crime as it does today. Capone has impacted Chicago in many ways. We see his impact on city life and people bribing politicians, to a song written by an underground Chicago hip-hop artist, Mike One, as he refers to Chicago as the throne of Al Capone, referring to how Chicago can be a dangerous place, yet still a beautiful one. It is important to remember that while the 20s and 30s were a time of modesty and chivalry, that there was still bad things that happened, and that it will be like that for the rest of time. Capone has taught us that we must learn about our history so that it does not repeat itself, and that every triumph has a tragedy.